7 Buddhist lessons for older adults to stop worrying and enjoy life. Buddhist teachings. Do you ever feel overwhelmed by the weight of your own mind? In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world sleeps and the silence feels almost sacred, have you ever found yourself trapped inside your own thoughts? The regrets of the past, the fears about the future, these invisible burdens seem to grow heavier as we age, don't they? Every day brings new worries, whether it's about our health, our relationships, or simply the relentless passage of time. But what if there was a way to step out of this cycle of anxiety? What if I told you that peace doesn't come from waiting for the storm to pass, but from learning how to find stillness within it? Imagine for a moment that you could pause right now and release the weight of everything you're holding onto. That you could free yourself from the constant chase for control, from the suffocating pressure to have everything in order before you allow yourself to rest. What if peace wasn't something you had to work for, but something you could step into, right here, right now? This video is not just another philosophical reflection. It is a life raft for anyone who has ever felt the crushing weight of worry or regret. It's filled with powerful Buddhist teachings that will help you release the need to control what's beyond your grasp and learn to embrace life's imperfections with grace. It's a journey designed to help you stop worrying and start living, to reclaim your joy, your peace, and your present moment. You may feel the weight of time more acutely as you grow older, but you don't have to face it with fear. The Buddha's teachings are a timeless guide, offering wisdom that speaks to the heart, especially for those who have lived many years, but still seek a life of meaning and peace. These 7 Buddhist lessons will show you how to stop waiting for life to be perfect and start living with contentment and acceptance right now. If you've ever felt like life is passing you by, or if you've caught yourself endlessly chasing after a peace that seems just out of reach, this is the video you've been waiting for. This isn't just another video you'll scroll past. It's an invitation to transform how you experience your world, to live with mindfulness, and to embrace each moment as it comes. If you're ready to discover true freedom from worry, to learn how to find peace no matter what life throws your way, hit that subscribe button now. Join us on this journey of self-discovery, because true peace is waiting for you to step into it. Stay with us through every moment of this video. You'll be amazed at the transformation that begins with simply embracing the present. This is more than just philosophy. It's a life-changing practice that anyone can adopt, no matter their age. Like, comment, and subscribe now, and let's embark on this peaceful journey together. Chapter 1: The Present Moment, Your Sanctuary of Peace. The present moment is often described in Buddhist teachings as a sanctuary of peace. It's a timeless concept that we all can relate to, but often overlook in the whirlwind of life. As we age, our minds naturally drift toward what has already passed or what might lie ahead. We replay conversations from years ago, replaying words that were spoken, wishing we could have said something differently. We anticipate what tomorrow holds, filled with worry about health, finances, or simply the passage of time. Yet, despite all the thoughts that occupy our minds, life only exists right now. The Buddha's teachings emphasize this core truth: do not dwell in the past nor dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In a world filled with distractions and anxiety, this might seem like an impossible practice. But in the teachings of the Buddha, this is the pathway to true peace. It's in the present that life truly happens. No matter how much we may dwell on past regrets or future uncertainties, those moments are never truly here. Only the now holds life, breath, and meaning. Imagine sitting in your favorite chair, the one that has supported you for years. You feel the softness of the fabric beneath you, the warmth of the sunlight streaming in through the window, and the gentle rhythm of your breath. In that moment, if you let go of the thoughts about your past or future, you will discover something profound. you'll find peace, not because you've made everything perfect, but because you've allowed yourself to simply be. A beautiful Buddhist parable illustrates the essence of being present in the moment. There was once an elderly monk who had dedicated his life to the study of the mind. One day, a young man, troubled by incessant worries, went to the monk for guidance. His thoughts raced constantly about his job, his family, his health. He felt trapped in a storm of anxiety that he could not escape. The monk, sensing the young man's distress, led him outside during a fierce storm. As the rain poured down and the winds howled, the monk calmly pointed to the ground beneath their feet. "Do you see how, despite the storm," the monk said, "the ground beneath your feet remains still and unmoved? The wind may howl and the rain may fall, but the earth stays steady." The young man was struck by the simplicity and depth of the monk's words. In that moment, he realized that despite the storm of thoughts in his mind, he could choose to remain grounded in the present. He could choose peace just as the earth remains unmoved despite the chaos surrounding it. This lesson, so simple yet profound, speaks directly to the struggles many of us face. As we age, we may feel as though we've lost control over many aspects of our lives. The future is filled with uncertainty, and the past, often filled with regret, haunts us. But the Buddha's message is clear. In the present moment, there is freedom. It is in the now that we can release our worries and just be. This is what mindfulness truly means, being fully aware of where we are and what we are doing right now. Mindfulness isn't about trying to stop the thoughts that race through your mind. It's about observing them and gently bringing your awareness back to the present moment. It's about savoring the warmth of sunlight on your face, the delicate fragrance of a blooming flower, or the feeling of a loved one's hand in yours. These small, seemingly insignificant moments contain all the peace we ever need. In our busy world, it's easy to overlook these moments. We hurry through life, thinking we have to be somewhere else, do something more, or achieve something greater. But the Buddha's wisdom reminds us that in each moment there is enough, there is nothing more we need. Life, in its entirety, unfolds within the present. And when we truly understand this, we realize that we've been waiting for peace in the wrong place. Let me share a story of an elderly woman named Clara who found herself lost in the busyness of life, even in her later years. She spent so much time reflecting on the what-ifs of her past and the maybes of her future that she could no longer enjoy the simple moments around her. Her children were grown, and much of her day was filled with repetitive tasks, cooking, cleaning, and worrying about what was to come next. One day, her granddaughter came to visit, and Clara, as always, found herself preoccupied with worries about the future. But her granddaughter, seeing her grandmother's stress, took her hand and led her outside to the garden. "Grandma, look at the flowers," the little girl said. "Do you see how they're blooming right now, just as they are?" Clara paused. For the first time in a long while, she took a deep breath and noticed the sun on her skin, the sound of the birds chirping, and the soft rustle of the leaves in the breeze. She realized that in that moment, there was nothing else she needed to do. The worries about her health, her children, her past, none of them mattered right then. She could simply be. And in that simple act of noticing, Clara found peace. This, my friends, is the beauty of the present moment. It doesn't require any grand changes or accomplishments. It only asks that we stop and become aware of the life unfolding right before us. It is in those moments when we truly let go of the need for everything to be just right that we discover a deep, profound peace that was always there, waiting for us to notice. Buddhism teaches that peace is not a distant goal we must strive for, but a state of being that is always available to us. The present moment holds the key to that peace. Just as the earth remains unmoved by the storm, so too can we find our grounding in the here and now. By practicing mindfulness and embracing the present, we discover a sense of peace that transcends the worries of the past and future. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by the noise in your mind, remember this simple teaching. The present moment is your sanctuary of peace. It is here, right now, that life unfolds in its fullness. There is nothing more to wait for, nothing more to fix, just this moment, just this breath, just this life. Embrace it and peace will follow. Chapter 2: Acceptance, Embracing Life's Imperfections. In the quiet moments of reflection, many of us find ourselves yearning for life to unfold in a certain way. We envision our health remaining strong, our relationships unchanging, our careers steadfast. We dream of stability and certainty, thinking that if we could just control life enough, we could keep the storms at bay. Yet, the Buddha's teachings remind us of a profound truth. Impermanence, the reality that everything changes, including the things we hold most dear. This is not just a fact of nature, but an essential Buddhist teaching that serves as a foundation for peace. We might expect our bodies to remain youthful, our minds sharp, and our loved ones near. But the Buddha knew, and life teaches us daily, that nothing lasts forever. The health we once enjoyed may begin to wane, our relationships might evolve or even drift apart, and the certainty of youth fades with time. In these moments of change, we often feel a deep sense of loss, but it's not the loss itself that causes suffering, it's our resistance to it. Acceptance, in the Buddhist sense, is a powerful yet subtle practice. It's not about giving up or resigning ourselves to suffering. It's not about becoming passive in the face of life's challenges. Instead, acceptance is the courageous act of surrendering the belief that life must unfold according to our will. It's about releasing the grip of expectations and instead embracing life as it is, with all its imperfections. A common misunderstanding about acceptance is that it means approval of the circumstances we find ourselves in. But the Buddha's wisdom shows us that acceptance does not equate to approval. We don't have to love every situation or agree with every turn in our lives. Acceptance is simply about acknowledging what is without resistance. It's about meeting life as it is, without the urgency to control or fix it. One of the most profound lessons in Buddhism comes from the practice of letting go of attachment. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from clinging to things as they are, whether that's our bodies, our plans, or our loved ones. The more tightly we hold on to something, the more we set ourselves up for pain when it inevitably changes or slips through our fingers. But peace comes when we stop fighting against the current of reality and learn to flow with it. Take the story of an elderly woman named Hana. She had spent much of her life serving others, raising children, and supporting her community. She was a pillar of strength and stability for those around her. However, after the passing of her beloved husband, Hana found herself grappling with profound sadness. The life she had known for so long had suddenly shattered. The man she had built her life around was gone, and she felt adrift in a sea of grief. In the months that followed, Hana fought against the overwhelming flood of emotions. She believed that if she could just hold on to the past, if she could resist the sadness and keep herself busy, life might return to the way it once was. She thought that by resisting the grief, she could make the pain go away. But as many of us experience, the more she fought it, the more intense the pain became. One day, a wise monk who had known Hana for many years came to visit her. Seeing her struggle, he gently sat beside her and shared a simple yet profound teaching. "Hana," he said, "the flood of life is here, and no matter how hard you try, it cannot be stopped. The more you fight it, the harder it will push back, but if you can let go of the resistance, you will find the peace that you are seeking. Acceptance is not about giving up, it is about allowing the flow of life to move through you without trying to control it." It was a turning point for Hana. In that moment, she realized that her resistance to the change she had experienced, the loss of her husband, was keeping her in a perpetual state of suffering. She wasn't denying her grief, but by letting go of the expectation that life should have remained the same, she allowed herself to experience peace amidst the pain. Acceptance became her anchor, not to give up, but to let go of the struggle against what was beyond her control. Hannah's story teaches us a powerful lesson. Life doesn't always unfold according to our plans, and that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay, it's the nature of existence. Nothing remains static. Just as the seasons change, so too do our lives. The Buddha's teachings remind us that clinging to the past or desperately holding onto what we love only creates suffering. In the act of accepting life as it is, we find freedom. In our own lives, we may find it difficult to accept things that don't go the way we envisioned them. Maybe our health is not what it once was, or the relationships we cherish are evolving in ways we hadn't expected. It's natural to resist these changes, but the more we cling, the more we suffer. By accepting our current circumstances, without judgment or shame, we open ourselves to peace. I remember a man named Samuel, who was in his late 70s, and had always prided himself on his ability to plan and maintain control over every aspect of his life. He had built a successful career, raised children, and provided for his family with unwavering dedication. But as he aged, he began to face the physical limitations of his body, and his wife fell ill. Samuel struggled to accept the changes, feeling a loss of control. The anxiety of not being able to protect his loved ones or fix his own body was overwhelming. One day, his daughter, noticing the stress he was carrying, took him for a walk. She encouraged him to stop and simply breathe in the moment. "Dad, look at the trees," she said. "They bend in the wind, they lose their leaves in the fall, but they continue to stand. They don't try to stop the seasons, they embrace them." Samuel took a moment to reflect on this, and in that brief pause, he realized something profound. The more he fought against life's inevitable changes, the more exhausted he became. By simply accepting the season he was in, his aging body, his wife's illness, he found a sense of calm that he had been desperately searching for. Acceptance, in its deepest sense, is about making peace with life as it unfolds. It's not about resignation, it's about surrendering the need to control what cannot be controlled. It's about releasing the burden of perfection and embracing life's inevitable imperfections with grace. The Buddha teaches us that true peace arises when we stop fighting against reality and instead embrace it as it is. Acceptance is the key to unlocking peace in the face of life's constant changes. The next time you find yourself resisting the changes that come with aging, loss, or disappointment, remember this. Life does not need to be perfect for you to find peace. By accepting what is, you can discover a deeper sense of freedom and tranquility. Let go of the struggle and open your heart to life as it is. Peace is waiting for you in the quiet surrender to the present moment. Chapter 3: Not every thought deserves your attention. As we grow older, it's not uncommon for our minds to feel like a crowded marketplace, filled with a constant stream of thoughts, many of them uninvited, lingering like noise in the background of our consciousness. The Buddha, in his infinite wisdom, often likened the mind to a garden. In a well-tended garden, only the seeds of good, nourishing thoughts will take root and grow, just as only positive intentions and actions will bring peace. But in the garden of the mind, if left untended, many weeds grow, thoughts of fear, regret, worry, and doubt. These weeds can overrun the peace we so desperately seek. One of the central teachings of Buddhism is the recognition that we are not our thoughts. In fact, the Buddha often described the mind as being like the sky, vast, open, and free from attachment. Thoughts like clouds drift across this vast expanse, but they do not define the sky. The clouds come and go, changing shape and direction, yet the sky itself remains unaffected by their passing. So, what does this mean for us in practical terms? It means that not every thought we have deserves our attention. Just because a thought arises in our mind doesn't mean it needs to take root. In fact, the more we attach ourselves to every passing thought, the more power we give it. And as we age, those thoughts can become louder, more persistent, and harder to ignore. But this is where the wisdom of mindfulness becomes our ally. By learning to observe our thoughts without identifying with them, we can create space between ourselves and the mind's chatter. Let me share with you a story of a retired carpenter named Samuel. Samuel had spent his life working with his hands, crafting furniture, fixing things around the house, and enjoying the quiet satisfaction of building with care. But as he entered his later years, he began to notice something unsettling. The peacefulness he once enjoyed had started to slip away. His mind, once calm and clear, now seemed filled with a constant, relentless stream of thoughts, many of them fear-based and filled with regret. Samuel began to struggle with sleepless nights, unable to quiet his racing mind. He would lie awake, replaying past conversations, worrying about his health, and anxiously thinking about what the future might hold. Despite his best efforts, he felt disconnected from the peace he had once known. It was during this time that Samuel met a Buddhist teacher, a woman who had spent years studying mindfulness practices. She introduced him to a technique that would transform the way he viewed his mind. "Samuel," she said gently, "your thoughts are like clouds in the sky. They come and go, but they don't define who you are. Instead of trying to fight them or push them away, simply observe them. See them for what they are, fleeting, impermanent, and not a true reflection of yourself." At first, Samuel struggled with this idea. He was used to identifying with his thoughts, believing them to be true reflections of himself. His worries, his regrets, his fears, all felt so real, so urgent, but he decided to give the practice a try. Each day he would sit quietly for a few minutes, simply observing the thoughts that came to him. "I hear you," he would say to the thought. "I see you, but you don't define me." Over time, Samuel began to realize something profound. Many of his thoughts were just old recordings, playing out fears and doubts from the past, with no real connection to his present reality. One morning, as he sat in the garden, a thought came to him. "I'm getting old, and I'm afraid I won't have enough time to finish everything I want to do." Samuel noticed the thought without judgment, acknowledging its presence but not giving it power. "Yes, I hear you," he said quietly to himself, "but I don't need to believe you." And just like that, the thought passed, leaving no trace behind. It was as if the thought was a cloud drifting across the sky, unable to settle or take root. Through this simple yet profound practice of mindfulness, Samuel began to reclaim the peace he had lost. By not feeding his thoughts with attention and belief, they gradually lost their power over him. The more he practiced, the more he realized that many of his thoughts weren't even his own. They were stories his mind had been telling him for years, but they no longer served him. They were no longer true. This is the power of mindfulness, the ability to create space between ourselves and our thoughts. It's not about trying to silence the mind or eliminate every thought. It's about learning to observe them without attachment, without belief. Thoughts are like visitors that come and go, and we don't need to invite every one of them to stay for tea. The Buddha taught that the mind is the source of both our suffering and our liberation. When we attach ourselves to every thought, we become bound by them. But when we learn to let them pass without clinging, we find freedom. Our thoughts no longer control us. We are no longer at the mercy of their constant chatter. Let me tell you about another story, this time of a woman named Clara. Clara had spent much of her life worrying about what others thought of her. She would replay social interactions in her mind, wondering if she had said the wrong thing or made a bad impression. As she grew older, this habit of overthinking became even more pronounced. One day, a close friend of Clara's noticed her anxiety and suggested she try a meditation practice. Clara, skeptical at first, decided to give it a go. During her first meditation, Clara noticed something extraordinary. The thoughts came rushing in. What if I do this wrong? What if I don't get the benefits? But as she sat, she remembered the teachings she had heard. Not every thought deserves your attention. Clara let the thoughts come, but instead of attaching to them, she let them float by like leaves in the wind. And in that moment, she realized that all those years of worrying had been a waste of energy. The thoughts didn't define her. They weren't the truth. Over time, Clara learned to let go of her overthinking. She stopped identifying with every passing thought, and instead, she began to experience the peace that comes from simply being present in the moment. She stopped trying to control her thoughts and allowed them to come and go as they pleased. The lesson here is simple yet profound. Not every thought deserves your attention. Our minds, especially as we age, can become filled with thoughts that no longer serve us. They may be rooted in fear, regret, or old patterns of thinking. But just because a thought arises doesn't mean it needs to take hold of us. By practicing mindfulness, we can create space between ourselves and our thoughts, allowing us to observe them without attachment or belief. The more we practice this, the more we realize that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness that observes them. And in this realization, we find true freedom. Our thoughts no longer have the power to dictate our emotions, our actions, or our peace. We can let them come and go like clouds in the sky, unimportant, fleeting, and impermanent. As you sit quietly today, take a moment to observe the thoughts that arise. Ask yourself, do I need to believe this thought? Does it serve me? And if it doesn't, simply let it pass. Watch how it fades, as all thoughts eventually do. You are not defined by them. You are free to simply be. Chapter 4: Impermanence. Fear does not last forever. One of the most profound teachings in Buddhism is the understanding of impermanence, the idea that all things, whether good or bad, will inevitably change. This includes our fears, anxieties, and even our pain. In a world that often feels unpredictable and overwhelming, understanding that everything is temporary can be a powerful tool for peace. For many of us, as we grow older, we become more acutely aware of life's fleeting nature. We see our bodies aging, our relationships evolving, and the world around us constantly shifting. This awareness can stir up fear and anxiety, but Buddhism teaches us to see change not as a threat, but as a natural part of the cycle of life. Nothing stays the same forever, and this truth can bring a sense of relief, especially in times of great difficulty. The Buddha spoke often of impermanence and its role in relieving suffering. He encouraged his followers to understand that all experiences, including our fears, are temporary. This is not a call for resignation or passivity, but an invitation to face life with clarity and courage. When we can recognize that even our darkest moments are part of a greater flow, we can experience a deep sense of peace. Let me share with you a story from the Buddha's teachings that illuminates this understanding. It's the story of Kisa Gautami, a mother who was overwhelmed with grief after the death of her young child. Her pain was so great that she could not accept it. She carried her son's body around the village, asking anyone she met for a cure to bring him back to life. But no one could help her. In her desperation, she was directed to the Buddha. When she arrived at the Buddha's presence, she wept uncontrollably, asking him to save her child. The Buddha, with great compassion, listened to her sorrow and then gave her a simple yet profound task. Bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known death, and I will bring your child back to life. Kisa Gautami went from house to house, asking for a mustard seed, but in each home she was met with the same response. Death had touched every family in the village. Whether it was a mother, a father, a child, or a beloved friend, no home had been untouched by loss. After many days of searching, Kisa Gautami returned to the Buddha, finally understanding the truth he had shared with her. Loss is universal. No one is exempt from the cycles of life and death. This powerful story teaches us that death, while painful, is part of life's natural rhythm. Nothing, no moment, no person, no feeling lasts forever. Kisagotami's realization that her grief, though deep, was not unique, brought her a sense of peace. She understood that her pain would eventually pass, just as life and death ebb and flow in an eternal dance. We all experience moments of fear and anxiety in our lives. Whether it's the fear of illness, the loss of a loved one, or the uncertainties of aging, these fears can feel all-consuming. But it is essential to remember that fear, like everything else, is impermanent. Just as the sun rises each day after the darkness of night, so too will the heart heal over time. Even the most intense emotions, the most overwhelming fears, will eventually pass. I think of a man named Robert who came to me for advice after being diagnosed with a serious illness. Robert, in his 60s, had always been strong and healthy. But the news of his diagnosis sent him into a spiral of fear and anxiety. He spent sleepless nights imagining the worst, visions of suffering, of losing his independence, of leaving his family behind. It seemed as though his fear had taken root and would never leave. I shared with Robert the teachings of impermanence, the understanding that all things change and no fear lasts forever. I told him about Kisagotami and her journey through grief. Her story helped him see that the fear he was feeling, as real and intense as it was, would not stay with him forever. It was a moment in time, a passing cloud. Slowly, Robert began to accept his diagnosis, not as a permanent curse, but as part of the natural flow of life. His fear started to lose its grip on him as he realized that nothing, not even illness or pain, could stay forever. In the midst of his journey, Robert started to focus on the things that brought him joy and meaning, spending time with his loved ones, revisiting old passions, and appreciating the beauty of each day. He found that by embracing the impermanence of life, he could also embrace the fullness of life, even in the face of uncertainty. His fear did not define him. It was simply another fleeting moment in the greater story of his existence. This is the essence of impermanence, the truth that no matter how intense our fear, our grief, or our pain may feel, they are not permanent, they too shall pass, and in this understanding we find freedom. We are not bound by our emotions, our circumstances, or our past. Instead, we are free to ride the waves of life, knowing that every storm eventually calms and every dark night gives way to the dawn. Buddhism teaches that suffering is a natural part of life, but it is not the end. By recognizing the impermanence of all things, including our fears and struggles, we can face them with acceptance and courage. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that just as the sun rises after the night, so too will peace and healing come after our darkest moments. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by fear, anxiety, or sorrow, remember this. Nothing lasts forever. Your pain, your fear, your worries, none of them are permanent. They will pass just as the seasons change. Embrace this truth, and in doing so, you will find the peace that comes with accepting life's fleeting nature. Let this awareness of impermanence free you from the grip of fear and allow you to step into each moment with a heart full of grace and resilience. Chapter 5. Let go of control, trust life's flow. As we grow older, there's a natural tendency to want to control our lives more tightly. The unpredictability of life becomes more apparent, and we may find ourselves gripped by the desire to manage every outcome, whether it's our health, our relationships, or our legacy. After all, we've lived long enough to know that life doesn't always go as planned. We've seen loved ones come and go, our bodies change, and the world evolve around us. The instinct to control these changes is only natural. Yet Buddhism offers a profound truth: clinging to control only causes suffering. Life, in its most beautiful and terrifying truth, is like a river, flowing, changing, and constantly moving. Trying to control every current of this river, trying to dictate where it should go or when it should slow down, only leads to exhaustion. We cannot hold back the flow of life. We cannot stop time, reverse aging, or prevent loss. But what we can do is trust the river, allowing ourselves to flow with it, rather than constantly paddling upstream. Consider the story of Walter, an elderly man who had spent his entire life meticulously planning and controlling every aspect of his world. Walter was a man of order, his days were structured, his routines were predictable, and he took great pride in managing every detail of his life with precision. He believed that if he controlled enough, he could avoid the hardships that life often brings. But when his beloved wife passed away, Walter was confronted with a harsh reality. No amount of control could have prevented this inevitable part of life. In the weeks following her death, Walter found himself overwhelmed by grief. He realized that the loss of his wife, someone who had been his partner for decades, was something that no amount of planning, no level of control could have changed. His grief wasn't just emotional. It felt like a sharp, physical wound, as though everything he had worked so hard to maintain had been ripped away from him. He couldn't control it, and that loss of control was terrifying. In his distress, Walter sought the guidance of a meditation teacher. He was desperate for peace but didn't know how to find it. The teacher, with gentle compassion, explained that letting go of control was not about resignation or giving up. It wasn't about surrendering to despair. Instead, it was about trusting the natural flow of life, trusting that life would unfold as it needed to, with or without our interference. The teacher explained that our attempts to control every aspect of life were like trying to hold onto a tight fistful of water. The more we clench, the more it slips through our fingers. By releasing the need to control, we create space for peace to enter. Let go of the need to control, the teacher said softly, and allow yourself to flow with life's current just as it is. At first, Walter resisted. He had spent his entire life trying to manage his fate. The idea of letting go seemed foreign, even reckless. How could he simply let life unfold without ensuring the outcome? But over time, Walter began to understand the Buddha's teaching. Life is not something to be controlled, it is something to be embraced with acceptance. Through meditation, Walter learned to let go. He allowed himself to feel his grief fully, without trying to suppress it or shape it into something manageable. Instead of forcing himself to move on or get better, he allowed himself to simply be in the moment. In time, his grief softened, not because it disappeared, but because he stopped resisting it. The acceptance of his sorrow allowed space for healing. Walter's story offers a profound lesson. Letting go does not mean giving up control, it means trusting life to unfold naturally. When we let go, we stop fighting against the natural changes of aging, loss, and transition. We stop trying to push against the river, and instead we learn to float with it. It's about giving ourselves permission to breathe, to experience each moment fully, without the pressure to control or perfect it. There's a certain peace that comes with accepting life's flow. The more we try to resist change, whether it's the aging process, the loss of loved ones, or even the shift in our own inner landscape, the more we burden ourselves with unnecessary suffering. By letting go, we free ourselves from the constant strain of trying to control the uncontrollable. We allow ourselves to be present in our lives, to experience them with all their imperfections, and to trust that each moment is unfolding exactly as it should. Take the example of my friend Clara, who, in her late 70s, found herself constantly overwhelmed by the changes that came with aging. Clara had always been an active and independent woman. But as she aged, she found herself losing the physical abilities she had once taken for granted. Simple tasks like climbing stairs or walking long distances became increasingly difficult. This change left Clara frustrated, and she found herself trying desperately to maintain her old routine, pushing her body beyond its limits. It wasn't until Clara took up a practice of mindful walking that she began to understand the importance of letting go. Each day she would walk in the park, but instead of rushing through it, she slowed down and allowed herself to fully experience each step. She noticed the feeling of the ground beneath her feet, the rhythm of her breath, and the beauty of the world around her. She let go of her need to walk the way she used to. Instead, she trusted her body's flow and worked with it rather than against it. Over time, Clara found peace in this practice. She realized that letting go of the need to control her aging process didn't mean giving up. It meant accepting the changes and trusting in her ability to adapt. She learned that the river of life would always flow, and by letting herself flow with it, she could experience the world with more ease and joy. This is the heart of letting go of control. It's about releasing the need to shape every moment, every outcome, and every circumstance. Life doesn't need to be controlled to be meaningful or beautiful. It simply needs to be experienced. By trusting the flow of life, we open ourselves to a deeper peace, one that is not contingent on our ability to dictate every outcome, but on our ability to embrace whatever comes with an open heart. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the urge to control, whether it's your health, your future, or the people around you, remember this. Life will unfold as it will, and your task is to trust it. Let go of the tight grip, release the tension, and allow yourself to be a part of the river. In doing so, you will find that peace is not something you can force, but something you must let flow freely through you. Trust life's flow and peace will follow. Chapter 6. Speak kindly to your inner critic. Every one of us carries an inner voice, a voice that often judges us with harshness and demands more from us than we are capable of giving. This inner critic can be relentless, echoing in our minds, criticizing our every move, and reminding us of our perceived failures and shortcomings. As we age, this voice may grow louder, especially in the face of new challenges and uncertainties. The fear of not being enough, the anxiety about what's to come, or the regret for what we didn't do, these thoughts can feel all-consuming. It is at these moments that the teachings of Buddhism become especially profound. Buddhism invites us to treat ourselves with kindness, especially during the times when our inner critic is the loudest. One of the Buddha's core teachings is compassion, but not just for others, compassion for ourselves. We often think of compassion as something we offer others, but true compassion must begin within. When we speak kindly to ourselves, we transform our relationship with fear, doubt, and self-judgment. We stop seeing our flaws as failures and begin to see them as part of the human experience, something that deserves our gentle acceptance. Let me share with you the story of Miriam, an elderly woman who faced this struggle head-on. Miriam, a retired nurse, had spent much of her life caring for others, healing wounds, offering comfort, and tending to the needs of those in her community. But as she grew older, Miriam began to face a new challenge. She could no longer care for herself in the same way she had cared for others. She began to notice the inner critic, quiet at first, but growing louder with time. Miriam would wake each morning with a feeling of anxiety gnawing at her. Her mind was filled with worries. What if she could no longer take care of herself? What if she became a burden on her children? What if she couldn't enjoy the life she had left? The self-doubt crept in, telling her that she wasn't doing enough to stay healthy or be active. Every imperfection she saw in herself, whether physical or emotional, was magnified by her inner critic. At first, Miriam tried to fight these feelings. She would push herself harder, try to ignore the anxiety, and push through her fears. But the more she resisted, the louder the inner critic became. She felt as though she was failing, not just as a mother or grandmother, but as a person. It wasn't until Miriam encountered mindfulness practices that she learned a new way of meeting her fears with kindness. Through her practice of mindfulness, Miriam began to sit with her anxiety rather than fighting it. Instead of pushing her fears away, she acknowledged them. When a wave of anxiety would rise, she would say to herself, "I see you, I hear you, and I am here for you." This simple act of acknowledging her feelings with compassion made all the difference. She began to realize that her fear was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be met with gentle understanding. Over time, Miriam learned to quiet the inner critic, not by silencing it forcefully, but by speaking kindly to it. Miriam's journey with mindfulness was transformative. She began to see that the voice of self-doubt, while loud, was not the truth of who she was. She wasn't defined by her anxiety, and neither were her imperfections failures. By offering herself the same kindness and compassion she had given to so many others, Miriam started to heal. The Buddha taught that true compassion begins with ourselves. When we speak kindly to our inner critic, we shift the way we view our fears and anxieties. We no longer see them as enemies to defeat, but as part of the human experience, deserving of patience and understanding. The practice of treating ourselves with kindness allows us to feel more grounded and centered. Instead of pushing away our imperfections, we accept them with love, acknowledging that we are all works in progress. This acceptance leads to peace, not perfection. A story from the Buddha's life illustrates this point beautifully. Once, a man approached the Buddha, furious about a series of insults he had received from others. He was consumed with anger and wanted to confront those who had wronged him. But the Buddha, with great calm, asked him a simple question: if someone offers you a gift and you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The man replied, "It belongs to the person who offered it." The Buddha smiled and said, "The same is true of your anger. If you do not accept it, it cannot take root in you." This story teaches us that we are not obligated to accept the negative thoughts or self-criticism that arises in our minds. Just as we can choose whether or not to accept a gift, we can choose whether or not to accept the inner criticism and judgments that arise. The key is not to fight these thoughts, but to respond to them with compassion as we would to a frightened child. This principle applies directly to how we treat our inner critic. We don't need to accept the harsh words it speaks to us. We can recognize them, acknowledge them, and then choose to speak to ourselves kindly. In doing so, we stop feeding the cycle of self-criticism, and we open up space for healing and growth. As we age, our inner critic can become a persistent presence in our lives. We may struggle with feelings of inadequacy, wondering if we've done enough or been enough. But Buddhism teaches us to meet ourselves with kindness, especially in these moments. Every time we speak kindly to our inner critic, we take a step toward peace. We allow ourselves to be human, imperfect, and worthy of love. When we embrace ourselves with compassion, we break free from the shackles of judgment and self-doubt. Just as we would offer compassion to a friend who is struggling, we must learn to offer it to ourselves. In doing so, we transform our relationship with fear and anxiety, replacing judgment with acceptance and kindness. The next time your inner critic starts to speak, I invite you to listen, not with judgment, but with the loving attention you would offer to a dear friend. Ask yourself, what is this voice trying to protect me from? And then respond with kindness. I see you, I hear you, and I will be gentle with you. In this practice, we find that true peace doesn't come from silencing the critic. It comes from learning to live alongside it with compassion. This is the path of self-love, and it is a gift we all deserve to give ourselves. Chapter 7: Joy, a practice, not a prize. For many of us, joy often feels like a distant prize, something we'll experience only once everything else in our lives falls into place. We wait for the perfect conditions. Good health, stable relationships, financial security, or the completion of some big goal. We believe that joy is something to be earned, something that comes as a reward after a long period of striving. But Buddhism offers us a profound shift in perspective. Joy is not a prize at the end of the race. It is already present, tucked into the simple moments of our lives, waiting to be noticed. The Buddha's teachings tell us that true happiness isn't found in perfect circumstances, but in the way we engage with each moment. Life, in its most ordinary form, holds an abundance of joy if we are willing to open our eyes to it. From the warmth of the sun on our skin to the taste of tea on a cool morning, joy is all around us, often hidden in plain sight. But to recognize it, we must practice mindfulness, the art of being fully present and aware of the world as it is, without needing it to be anything more or less. Consider the story of Gerald, a man who spent much of his life chasing after the illusion of perfection. Gerald was meticulous, some might say obsessively so. Every detail of his life was planned to the T. His schedule, his goals, his finances. He worked hard to maintain control over every aspect of his existence, believing that one day, when everything was just right, he would be able to finally relax and enjoy the peace and happiness he longed for. But as the years passed, he found that the more he sought perfection, the more elusive joy seemed to be. Gerald often told himself that happiness would come once he had finished all the projects he set out to complete, once his house was perfectly organized, once his career reached its peak, or when his loved ones were free from any struggles. But no matter how hard he worked, there was always something more to do, another task to complete, and another worry to fix. It wasn't until one particularly quiet afternoon that Gerald began to shift his thinking. He had retired and was sitting in his living room, gazing out the window at the changing colors of the sky. His mind, as usual, was filled with thoughts of what he had yet to accomplish. But then, for the first time in what felt like forever, he decided to simply be with the moment. He noticed the soft warmth of the sunlight on his face, the gentle rustling of the trees outside, and the subtle hum of life continuing around him. In that brief moment, Gerald realized something profound. The conditions he had been waiting for to feel joy, peace, relaxation, perfection, had always been available to him, right in front of his eyes. He had been so focused on the future, on what still needed to be done, that he had missed the joy that was quietly present in the small, simple moments of life. This is the shift that Buddhism encourages us to make. We do not need to wait for the perfect moment to experience joy. We need to cultivate an awareness of the joy that already exists in the ordinary. It is the warmth of a cup of tea in our hands, the laughter shared with a friend, the beauty of a flower in bloom, or even the quiet stillness of a moment when we allow ourselves to simply be. Joy is not something we have to achieve. It is a way of being, of engaging with the world with an open heart and a mind that is present in the here and now. The Buddha spoke of this in his teachings on mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of being fully aware of the present moment, accepting it without judgment and experiencing it in its fullness. When we practice mindfulness, we allow ourselves to experience life as it is, rather than constantly striving for some imagined future or dwelling on an imperfect past. It's in these moments of presence that joy can arise, not as a prize to be earned, but as a natural byproduct of simply being. Think of a time when you were fully immersed in an experience, whether it was savoring a delicious meal, listening to your favorite music, or simply enjoying a quiet evening at home. In those moments, were you thinking about everything you had yet to do, or were you simply there, fully engaged with the present? These moments are opportunities to practice mindfulness, to tune into the world as it is, and to discover that joy doesn't depend on circumstances. It depends on our ability to be fully present. Buddhism teaches us that happiness is not a goal that lies in the future, nor is it something to be achieved once we have completed some checklist of tasks. Happiness is not something outside of us, it's already here, waiting to be discovered in the smallest of moments. We don't need to chase after joy, we only need to open our hearts to it. Consider the example of a woman named Clara, who had spent many years raising her children and building a career. Now in her 60s, Clara had the space and time to reflect on her life. But instead of feeling content with her accomplishments, Clara found herself constantly looking back at the past and worrying about the future. She thought that happiness would come once she completed certain projects or once she resolved the challenges she faced. But one evening, while sitting in her garden, Clara paused and noticed the vibrant colors of the flowers, the warmth of the evening breeze, and the laughter of her grandchildren in the distance. For the first time in a long while, she realized that she didn't need to be anywhere else or do anything more to experience joy. In that moment, Clara experienced what Buddhists call the fullness of the present moment. She didn't need to wait for the future or fix the past. The joy she sought had always been right there, in the simple beauty of the moment. This is the essence of Buddhism's teachings on joy. It's not something to be earned or achieved. It is a practice of being fully present with what is, of finding joy in the ordinary, and of embracing the present moment with an open heart. Every moment, no matter how simple or fleeting, holds the possibility for joy. And in every moment, there is an opportunity to practice mindfulness, to let go of striving, and to simply allow joy to arise naturally. In every breath, every step, and every moment, joy is waiting for us to notice it. The key is not in waiting for the perfect moment, but in recognizing that joy is already here. It's not a prize at the end of the road, it's the road itself. It's a way of being, not something to achieve, and in this understanding, we unlock the happiness that has always been available to us. So today, take a moment to stop striving, stop chasing, and simply be with what is. In the simplicity of the moment, you may find that joy is already here, ready to be embraced.